So I've done plenty of notching videos in the past, but they're all either out of date or built into variety videos, so it's difficult to decide where to send someone when they have questions. I did a video on IOG and Datalink a little earlier in the year dealing with top-down launches, which I was pretty happy with. This video I wanted to be a sort of follow-on from that, dealing with short-range launches from below primarily. It's one of the most common issues people seem to have dealing with angle gating from awkward aspects, so I'm going to give you some detailed breakdowns and then a ton of examples from actual gameplay. I'll also throw in some tips and examples when dealing with multiple threats simultaneously. I'll do my best to organise everything into chapters for YouTube as usual. First up, I'm not going to give the classic breakdown of what notching is, plenty of content about that already and you probably already know. And please don't give me all the "this isn't correct, it isn't how it works IRL or in DCS and stuff like that" comments. I don't care. This is how it works in War Thunder, and that's what I make guides for. So the best case scenario is this. You find the angle, you dump your chaff, and the missile bites and diverts. However, of course, you saw how it took a lot of chaff before it bit, and oftentimes it'll look more like this. The missile keeps rejecting the chaff and stays on course to take me out. This is angle gating in action. I've explained it plenty in the past with shorts and videos, but in the interest of being comprehensive, in this freeze frame we can see a thin green cone looking at my chaff, but my screen is still illuminated slightly as the missile is still centered on my position. If I switch to an overhead view, you can see this more clearly with the thin green cone looking at my chaff, but the main missile seeker still appears to be centered on my plane. Now, whilst the missile card does say TRK for track, this is a bit misleading. Whilst the missile is rejecting chaff, it's actually running on inertial guidance. Sensor view just doesn't show this immediately. You can think of it as sort of similar to the tracking suspension on a 9M. So the solution is to establish your notch, continuously start popping chaff at regular intervals and then changing your trajectory whilst maintaining the notch angle. Before I cover what I'd recommend as the proper technique, I want to look at some bad practice. Firstly is not holding the notch angle and not chaffing enough. In this example I'm not dropping chaff at regular enough intervals, and the issue here is when a chaff bundle falls out of the seeker's view, it reconnects and updates its guidance, at which point it's reconnected slightly behind me and I'm no longer notching. We know this is the case because my subsequent chaff pops are never even registered by the seeker. Next up is a common method to defeat angle gating that I've seen thrown around on Discord in a couple of videos which I'm not a fan of. This is continuing to pull away from the missile whilst dumping your chaff. And this can work and sometimes it is a useful thing to do. In this example you can see the missile overshoots as it doesn't follow my trajectory through the turn as it switches to inertial guidance during the notch window and then doesn't recapture me. This method is not reliable however, as it involves essentially flying out the other side of the notch window. You're liable to still be within the seeker's view when you leave the notch. It finds you again and then takes you out. And because you're no longer notching, subsequent chaff pops do nothing. Also, if we go back to the successful notch using this method, look at where my nose is pointing relative to the aggressor after I've completed my notch. I've completely given up my tail and I'm not in a good position to recommit. Were this in an actual game, I'd be massively disadvantaged from this point on. Now let's go through what I would deem best practice. Your first step is picking a direction. For now I'm just going to notch pretty much straight right or left as these missiles are head on at more or less the same altitude as me. I'll cover some more awkward angles in the live gameplay examples later on, but for now I just want to cover the basic concepts. So first you're going to hold down your pitch and be sure to use free look to be looking at the missile diamond at all times when you're doing this. This is especially important with these close range notches. This is your reference for if you're doing everything correctly. You're going to be following the diamond and how it's reacting to what you're doing. My first target is lining the missile seeker up so it cuts through my center of mass perpendicular to my velocity vector. The velocity vector is not necessarily equal to your angle of attack, so keep this in mind. It becomes more relevant at low speeds where most top tier airframes tend to pull a lot of AOA and essentially drift a bit in the air. I'm also trying to line up so it cuts through my bank angle at roughly 90 degrees. This isn't important for the notch itself of course, so it doesn't need to be as precise, but it helps to orient yourself correctly to dodge the inertial guidance. Once I've found this angle, and getting comfortable finding this angle is something that's going to come with practice, now I fully invert, rolling another 90 degrees and pitch down. If you've angled correctly, the missile should be roughly along the line of your wingtips as you roll over. By setting the maneuver up like this, it's very easy to maintain the notch throughout. Just make sure to keep putting that chaff out while you're doing it. I'll play that full clip in both live POV and sensor view just so you can see it without all the stop start as I just went through it there. Of course, pitching down isn't your only option. If the situation suits, you can instead roll back level and pitch up to dodge the inertial guidance. Missiles from behind still follow a similar principle, just this time you're pitching into the missile rather than away. The only difference being I'm looking to line the missile up against the top of my airframe rather than the bottom. Find the point at which the seeker is cutting through your velocity vector and bank angle perpendicularly, then either level off or fully invert to pitch up or down and dodge the IOG. Another fun fact for you in this clip is all the Fox-3s in the game have a value called distance minimum value, which is set to 300 meters for all of them. Once it reaches this distance from you, it automatically switches to IOG. If you don't believe me, just watch a replay flying straight into a Fox-3 and notice how the grey IOG cone pops up just before impact. It doesn't really have any effect on how you play, but it can help pull off notches like this where you narrowly avoid the proxy. Now you may notice I've made zero mention of RWR, and that is very intentional here. When dealing with launches close up, namely when the missile diamond is visible, for the majority of your notch, your RWR is more of a crutch. It takes your attention away from what is actually happening on the screen. It may sometimes lead to your death. It is much more reliable to notch these based on the missile diamond. To prove this, I'm playing you a bunch of notches now with my RWR sensitivity set to 1%, so I'm not getting any pings. Now obviously don't actually set it to this for normal gameplay, you still need it for long range and stuff like that. I'm just showing you that all my short range notching is based off of the missile diamond and not my RWR. If you want to practice short range notching, I do actually recommend you jump in a custom and give this a go with your RWR set to 1%, and this will help you get over your over-reliance on it. The last structured clips I want to look at are for multiple launches simultaneously. Now this is especially not that representative of actual gameplay, it's hard to replicate the chaotic nature of these situations, so I'm just trying to explain the general idea. But I will show some actual gameplay examples in the second half of the video. So when you're dealing with two targets dead ahead, just at different altitudes, most people should find this fairly intuitive. Both missiles are coming from the same direction regardless of altitude, so I can notch normally and defeat both with the same maneuver, simply turning out to the right or left. Starting to pop chaff once I find the notch, before inverting and pitching down to evade the IOG. The difficulty arises when these missiles are coming from either side of me. In notching one missile, you have to turn into the other. This is when you need to go up or down. This is especially useful if both launches are from the same or similar altitudes. It's just the previous example flipped 90 degrees. So going up or down is now the equivalent of going left or right. It is a bit trickier with the airframe and camera control. I did actually die a couple of times trying to record these exact examples. What I tend to do is try and notch one at a time, which is actually easier in live gameplay, as getting two launches that will hit you simultaneously is quite rare. And even if you do, as long as you have a little bit of distance to work with and it isn't point blank, you can still notch each missile in turn. In these sensor views, I'm using the chase camera to show you how both missiles are notched simultaneously, and how I'm also trying to avoid a straight trajectory lest they recapture me on their inertial guidance. In this last example where I pitch up to notch, you can see how I'm trying to keep both missile diamonds within my camera. When I see the left missile divert, I can focus all my attention on the right missile, recognizing I need to pull a bit further away as it's got ahead of me slightly, then pitch out of the IOG. Now we've dealt with all the structured breakdowns, let's look at some actual gameplay clips. First up, I want to cover dealing with missiles that come from well below you, but it's really not that difficult once you get used to it. I'm still following the same steps I explained at the start of the video for single notches, just pulling away from the missile is now relative to where the launch is coming from, so with much more verticality. Again, I'm simply pulling away from the missile, lining up the diamond so it intersects my center of mass at 90 degrees, rolling 90 degrees so now it sits along the line of my wingtips, and then pitching away from the IOG. This last one here, I've put myself in an awkward position. Depending on your airframe, when it's this close, of course consider using your air brake and cutting some throttle to slow down and rotate your plane faster. You'll be surprised how close range you can actually still pull off a notch once you get comfortable with your airframe. I'll flick to the sensor view for this one. As with the structured examples at the start, you'll see how after the angle gating starts occurring, the missile holds its path on IOG and I can simply roll out of the way. Another good tip in actual gameplay is of course offsetting yourself rather than pushing someone head on. This gives you less distance to travel into the notch, meaning you can successfully pull off even closer range notching. In this clip I could have offset more to be honest, but even with the slight offset I did have, I can still pull off the full maneuver. Next one is why I was advising trying to line your bank angle perpendicular to the missile. Here I'm pitching up but not directly away from the missile, so I don't actually have that intersect that I like to work with. This makes it a little more awkward to orient myself and dodge the IOG when I roll, and it ends up a little close for comfort. Another example of offsetting here, I want to hold my lock to guide this
this ER in and secure the kill, so I'm going to move to my radar gimbal limit and notch as late as I can to hold the lock as late as I can. Once you have the confidence with this, you'll start to get the feeling for how late you can leave this and still successfully survive. I'll do some multi-notching examples now. First up in this one, see how I try to deal with each of these missiles individually so as not to overwhelm myself. I'm frequently using the vertical to complete these notches. By doing so, I have less angle I need to pull to notch each subsequent missile. My undoing comes when I pitch towards the Gripen to notch the last missile from the Hornet. Here's a good example of prioritization when dealing with multiple threats. First up is a simple single notch from below, and then I'm going to have to deal with an additional launch from the same target and a slightly further launch from a target to my rear, and I'll just pause it here quickly. What you're trying to do, if you can, is use your maneuver to dodge the IOG of the first threat to move into the notch for the second. Those launches on my left are more or less in the notch angle already, so if I fully invert and pitch down, I can maintain this notch, dodge the IOG, and simultaneously start pulling into the notch for the missile on my rear. I'll play it through now and you can see that in action. If you've been watching my air superiority series, this next clip should be familiar. This is an example from the qualifier tournament during the game that saw us qualify for the playoffs. I ventured out of position and get launched out from below on both sides. My only option is to pitch up and try and notch both simultaneously. And once again, here's the sensor view for that one so you can see what's going on. Last clip I want to voice over here I think shows a good flow to get into when jousting someone. I was doing some practice with Sab and you'll notice I end up tracing an S pattern up and down with each notch as we broadside each other. As you start pitching to avoid IOG, you should notice how this starts to feel quite natural when you're jousting someone. After you pitch up or down to dodge the IOG, continue on that trajectory as you recommit and fire. This means any missiles fired at you will be leading you following that trajectory. This perfectly sets up your next notch to pitch in the opposite direction, providing you with maximum separation from the IOG and seeker and minimal chance of the missile reacquiring you as you recommit after your notch. I have plenty more clips of stuff like this, but I don't want to be too repetitive, so in the interest of being concise, I'll leave it there. These kind of technical breakdowns I try to include in all my content, so if you found this helpful, please do check out my other stuff. For now, I'll leave you with what is pretty rare footage of me playing something that isn't a flanker in this outro.